In the last episode, we met Dan Pontefract, renowned author and speaker. We talked about the inspiration behind his book, The Future of Work is Gray. We also covered some of the key issues facing companies and the individuals that work in them. This week, we get deeper into the conversation and to some advice for workers. Before we dive in, though, I want to encourage you to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any videos on pragmatic tips to navigating the terrain against ageism. Yeah, it's amazing. As I mentioned to you before we went live here on the recording, my LinkedIn filled up with announcements of people going into retirement. Many of them, or most of them, were unwilling, and it just blew up in my LinkedIn last year in 2025 when a record number of jobs were lost, both in the U.S. but also in Europe, where I have a lot of connections, and it's amazing. In all of this, every person who walks out the door is typically decades of experience, decades of knowledge. You can give a room full of 20-year-olds an assignment, and they can Google and jump on ChatGPT. But somebody who's in their mid to late 50s, they already know the answer. They don't have to type anything. They don't have to click anywhere. They already know the answer. And this is all being lost. It's all being lost to the wind. And you mentioned in your book, you have a term that you call the experience dividend. And maybe we can get into this one and talk about what is the experience dividend, and what is it that companies are leaving on the table and not using.
Well, wherever I look and whatever I've done, even though I get quite what's the word? I get quite descriptive on what's wrong in some of my books and my research, etc. So whether that's collaboration and the inhibitors to collaboration, the silos, the egos, etc., whether it's purpose and, as I mentioned, short-termism and companies operating just for the short term, I always have hope. Like there's always a flip side. There's always like what could we do? And there are examples of organizations and leaders that are thinking in good, positive, hopeful ways. So as much as I'm alarmed and am an alarmist for sure, like ringing the bell at the fire department, I do believe that there is hope and that we can make some very positive changes because some are doing it. So the experience dividend, so the opposite of debt is a dividend. Like we would like somewhat obviously to allow our retirement savings to increase their dividends and continue to build upon a goodness. And that's my point, I guess, metaphorically. Mm-hmm. Three main areas I think we need to investigate and to make some change. And I like alliteration, so bear with me. So number one is what I call the career canvas. So we'll get into that. Number two is the wisdom wheel. And number three is the longevity lens. So kind of in order, career canvas, very simply, is that we need to set torch or set fire to the ladder, the career ladder. And whether you're young, as I call rivers, whether you're middle-aged, which are rocks, and whether you're older, which is a ruby in my metaphor, I think what our organizations are doing is not paying attention enough to the fact that we have to blow up the whole idea of the job families, which is an HR speak, which is to say you have an individual contributor and they move up maybe to be a team lead, they become a manager, and then they become a senior manager, and they become a director, and then it's the family within that. You're an electrician, or you're an engineer, or you're a pharmacist, right? Whatever it is, there's a path. Now, I'm not against there being still a path. I think people can progress, but what we have to equally do is re-architect the career, because not everyone, A, wants to go up. B, some people want to be lateral. And then let's say you're in the organization for a while, you're a rock or a ruby, you've been there middle age or older, then maybe there's times in which that you want to go down, maybe have a stint, maybe go outside of the organization and come back and boomerang in. Maybe they are fractional, maybe they're contract roles, maybe they're gigs, maybe they're assignments, maybe they're rotations. I think young people need apprenticeship roles. I think they very well could use a buddy system and in kind of short-term gigs alongside a mentor like a rock or a ruby middle-aged or older worker. So the whole thing, John, has to be, the metaphor where the plane is in the air, but we need to sort of change the livery or the fuselage. That is what
Yes.
we got to keep the career to a degree ladder, at least the career thinking in the air, and then retool the livery and or the fuselage so that the interior has both the kind of opportunity for people to grow and build up a career, but also to canvas out and have a whole different play. So that's the first one. I'll pause there.
I think I agree with you on the corporate side that needs to happen, that they reinvent a little bit how people can progress through the career. I think also from a personal perspective, I think and being a corporate executive for many years myself, we're also guilty, right? Because you start to identify yourself with what your role is, right? So if you're not on that progression path, you're not climbing in that corporate ladder, you feel like you failed, and so there's this thing that's pushing you forward. And then once you leave that hamster wheel in the corporate world, and you've been, let's say, pushed out of your company in a wave of retirements, to go back into a fractional role, or to go back and do something that's maybe part-time or at a lower level. I mean, that hurts from a personal perspective, from a pride perspective. And one of the things I've been trying to kind of preach a little bit on the podcast here is to try to divorce yourself from that pride, because you're almost as guilty in a way as the companies who have kind of put you on that wheel. We have to get ourselves off of that wheel and stop thinking like that, so that we can, build a canvas, as you mentioned, which is, I know you're going to get into a little bit more detail on that shortly.
I couldn't agree more. And I would say that we are trained, tooled, ingrained into thinking, to your point, that the only way for credibility is up with title progression, girth progression in terms of budget, team size, right? Title size, office size, right? These are all the trappings of a very antiquated line of thinking about your contribution and how you can have a sense of meaning and purpose to your work, to your life, quite frankly. So back to when we were kidding around earlier, when I said, the first question at a cocktail party is, hey, what do you do? That is such a lightning rod for inclusivity. Like, do you matter? Do you belong in the conversation? Because, if you're like, I'm on a 6-month gig. I'm a contractor. I'm a fractional CMO. I'm a fractional engineer. I'm a seamstress to be. I'm learning to be a seamstress. Whatever. Like, we have such identity and sense of agency and purpose tied into what your title is and what you do. Whereas, to your credit, like, what we've got to be rethinking as individuals is kind of like bucking that trend, all the while still in the airline, in the fuselage, helping to almost retool what the library and the fuselage looks like. So I think we can play a part if we sort of unite as individuals as well and kind of push up against the establishment. Meanwhile, I think the establishment has a lot of homework to do to retool said library and fuselage as well.
So do you have any suggestions or proposals? Do you outline any in your book? Of course, your book comes out in a few weeks, so I haven't read it. Do you have suggestions, proposals on how they can do that redesign of the fuselage in mid-flight?
Well, I'm writing particularly for leaders and people who are interested in sort of skilling their thinking, right? Ultimately on what a career ladder is and kind of retooling that. So that all being said, I think from an individual perspective, if I have any advice, and it is akin to what is in the book, and I point this out because the book, as I say a few times, like, you need to look in the mirror whilst you're leading this charge. Mm-hmm. So the canvas itself, right, is the opportunity to say to you and also to your team, this is how we're going to operate differently. So let me use this as an example by a couple of company examples, one in Canada, one in Germany. So in British Columbia, my home province, in fact, which is really neat of me to have stumbled upon when I did some work for this company. The company's called BCLC, British Columbia Lottery Corporation. And so, as you can imagine, they're in charge of the lottery and other sort of gambling and betting type situations, casinos, et cetera, right across the province. All the monies go back to the province, by the way, to help build roads and schools and whatever. So what I find out as I'm doing some work with them at their headquarters is they actually kind of flippantly told me one day, like, oh, yeah, we've got this thing called the PRP. I was like, oh, what's that? Well, the phased retirement program. I was like, oh, what's that? Like, oh, well, if you kind of put your hand up, you can sort of slow your retirement down so that you kind of work 80%, 60%, even 40% over a period of years. I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. That's the whole phase down that I'm advocating as part of this career canvas. So like, oh, we didn't think it was a big deal. I'm like, no one's doing this, at least that I'm coming across in Canada. And I said, is this open to anybody? I'm like, yeah, you can just kind of put up your hand. I'm like, that is such a way in which to then transfer that wisdom and get people sidelined with that other individual so that they can learn on the job some of the things. And so they eventually get to kind of a pairing where it's 50-50 or they move up or whatever the case is, right? So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. That's PRP, phased retirement program. Can we do that in the rethinking of careers and at the same time, the transference of wisdom for someone coming into the role? In Germany, you'll like this. It's a car example. So it's BMW. And when I'm working with BMW, I find out that they have something called, I always get the German translation wrong, but it's like the Senior Talent Transition Program. And you're like, oh my gosh, what's this? And so with their designers and a couple other units, when the chief designer or the director or the VP, they can put up their hand and they can say, hey, I still want to work. I love the work, but is there maybe a way for me to like not do the leadership stuff, but to still be a designer, or to still be on the testing side or whatever? And so BMW in Germany, and I don't know if this is everywhere, but certainly in Germany, because I saw it in action, that leader puts up their hand and HR works with them, and they basically relinquish the leadership responsibility. They then go back to being a individual contributor with their designer skills, their QA skills, whatever it is they've got. And then they promote up, like a rock, in my case, middle-aged worker, to become now that director or VP or whatever. And the other individual is like the consigliere, the mentor to that individual. They're not in charge of the final decisions. Of course, that person has taken on the new role and the other one has relinquished the responsibility for leadership. But it is just brilliant. And so again, they're thinking, hey, how can we still tap into the older worker, the Ruby, allow them still to have the same pay, like the same benefits, but they're now part of the team, not leading the team. I was like, my gosh, there is another example of a career canvas at play alongside this wisdom wheel. Like, how do we continue to make sure that we can inculcate a culture of capture and transfer of some of that tacit knowledge, some of that wisdom that's been gained, so that the whole team then can still function, but also thrive. So there's two little examples from two different parts of the world that are exemplary, but they're also tantamount to we can do it. Like, there's examples of doing it differently, whether it's the career canvas or wisdom wheel thinking.
No, first of all, I like your alliterations. Can you maybe define them a little bit more? The wisdom wheel, like what you used it in context, but.
So basically, the wisdom wheel is defined as the opportunity to capture, transfer, and educate the organization, the team, whatever, on said wisdom. And wisdom sits in younger workers, the Rivers, the middle-aged workers, the Rocks, and certainly the Rubies at the older level. And what we're not doing, though, in the wisdom wheel is that we have a flat tire, John. Right? The whole point is that we are either firing the people and not capturing it, whether they're young, middle-aged, or certainly older. and or we're certainly not transferring it. So the recommendation, for example, just one little example would be what are called cognitive task analyses. Now it sounds crazy, CTAs. So what are we doing in the advent and now opportunity with AI to go around and just start filming all the people, and particularly older workers? Film them, like get them in a camera. What do they know? What's their relationships with the client or in the service line or in the QA or wherever it is, engineering? I don't care. Why are we not filming them? And why? And then so the CTA, the cognitive task analysis capture, is now we've got all this gold of their stories, their intellect, their tacit knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. So now we've got it. So what are we going to do with it? And when we make that point, now the wisdom wheel starts really churning, and we're like, all right, John used to work at Volvo and he's got like 1 million stories. So here's like John's stories woven in with AI and learning management systems and all this good stuff to then say, this is how we're going to teach people going forward. A flip side to this story is Apple. Before Jobs passed away, one of the things that he asked to be done was to get 2 librarians hired. And those librarians were actually historians. And the historians went around the company and to alumni and started interviewing them about what worked with Newton or what didn't work with Newton, what worked with Lisa, what didn't work with Lisa, and so on. And so he had the foresight back in, maybe it was 2008, 2009, to go ahead and say, there's gold in the stories of what we did right and what we did wrong. And so I think, as usual, Jobs is way ahead of the time, or his time, or any of our time. And that's an example of CTA, essentially, cognitive task analyses. It's like the wisdom wheel can turn and not be deflated or flat if we are thinking strategically about what we know that's not sitting on a hard drive, on a Google Drive, in an email, or an Instagram DM message, right? That's what I'm getting at.
Now that's brilliant, because we always talk about saying, "Oh, we have to learn from history," but that's generally, I think people think about that meaning like global history, international history, geopolitical history. But to think about that within an organization, and it's the history of the company and what made it successful or unsuccessful in the past on specific projects. I think that's a brilliant idea.
I honestly, like the wisdom wheel concept, I think every organization, small, medium, or large, can have a historian. Now, that doesn't have to, like, it could be an AI historian, like it could be a role that is, someone looking after an HR that's just like, hey, let's go do this. But you don't need an actual human being in some cases. In some cases, I think you do. I think like Ford and like large organizations like BMW and Apple, et cetera, I think it's a great idea. You can learn a lot from the history of an organization.
No, certainly you can. I also love your terms of rivers, rocks, and rubies. And I think that's obviously a replacement for generational titles. How did you come up with that? And what's the purpose for using that terminology as opposed to saying, early in your career, mid-career, late career, or whatever other terminology?
So I get really ticked off, and I'm using it in this interview with you because that's the vernacular. But I get really ticked off when we start calling workers of a certain vintage older workers or elders. It's driving me bonkers. But what drives me even more bonkers is when we associate a generational label to them. So I'm Gen X, but I'm Gen X in life. I'm not Gen X at work. I might like Pearl Jam and other bands from the 90s with Seattle flavor to them, but I'm not a Gen X employee. And so, for example, when we had the whole "Hey Boomer," "Yo Boomer," "You Boomer" kind of mantra or meme happening a few years ago, that leaked into the workplace, and so all of a sudden now older workers were boomers, and boomers in the workplace were sort of laughed at, scoffed at, and it's like, no. So I take huge umbrage with the fact that we continue, HR is culpable, as are other parts of the org, but identifying people by their generation. It doesn't compute. What computes for me is the fact that you and I, John, have gone through 3 eras, and my kids will go through 3 eras. Their kids will go through 3 eras. We all go through 3 eras, and those eras, doesn't matter what birth year you were born, and it certainly doesn't matter really how old you are. Like, there's a range, but it doesn't matter absolutely the age of 28 you become a rock. So I am paying homage to the 2 types of intelligence, but saying actually there's a third. So over here in the rock land, you have fluid intelligence. Fluid intelligence is 16 to some age, whatever it is, 28, 38, I don't care. It doesn't matter. But it's like you're learning. You're not quite stoic yet. You don't have all the answers. You got tons of ideas, but your fluidity is like a river. It's like, right? You're on a roller coaster river ride. Essentially, you're like, put me in, coach. Let me learn. I'll make mistakes. We know you will. But you have then your rock era that you graduate to. So you're still in your river. Like, the river is you. It doesn't ever go away. So you're in a river, but now you've got rocks in your river. Those rocks give you stability. They can protect. They can you can be looked up to, like, oh wow, look at that rock. That's like, there's some solid stoic, leadership happening there. And then as the river continues and it's shining your rock, you enter your Ruby era. And the Ruby era now has this crystallized intelligence, which is why it's a gem. And the Ruby is able to look around corners, right? It really now has a lot of that history we talked about of what went wrong and what went right in the past, this tacit knowledge that you just don't earn when you're in your fluid or river era. And so this idea, and whatever the age is, again, I don't care. It could start when you're 45, 55, 65. It doesn't matter. It's that each of us are unique, and the river, rock, ruby eras are up to you and up to us, I guess, right? How you define yourself. And it's a natural, flowing kind of state. So maybe you're a rock, maybe you're a ruby. I don't really care, but I think that we can do a better job in our organizations ultimately of, you don't have to say, here's all our rivers, rocks, and rubies. It's just the concept. And to stop this nonsense of generations, and certainly stop the nonsense of calling people elders or older workers, it's just like, hey, like we've got this great 3-level era kind of career path, if you will, and that just makes people feel good. What do you want to be, a ruby? That's shining gem of wisdom. Come on.
As we kind of get closer to the end, I think, of the episode here and the conversation, I think you ended on a really great note there with this progression from rivers, rocks to rubies ultimately. My target audience on the podcast is really people who've been impacted by ageism, and the name itself, the Ageism Survival Guide, is what can they do to either survive in the workplace, or what to do when they've been forced out of the workplace, and what to do, as a let's say a second career or a second reinvention of themselves. Now, your target audience, I think you mentioned before, is a little bit more the executives, and trying to raise that alarm on this thing is coming, this visible train crash, which is unavoidable. If you were to talk to the audience here on the podcast, the people who are impacted by this, what advice could you give them?
A few, certainly. So I have a couple adages. One is, I think we have to have a very stoic but proud kind of age against the machine type of thinking. That's sort of a riff on the old band Rage Against the Machine. But age against the machine is be a realist that there are a hell of a lot of ageist practices that are visible and invisible that you won't be able to remedy but you still have to be stoic enough to recognize. So Age Against the Machine is just basically saying, look, you are not going to be able to solve those problems out there. So just recognize, accept, and then move on. When I say move on, I don't mean be flippant. I'll get to kind of what my other practices are. I think we have to be loud and proud. When I say we, I'm 55 by the time this thing reveals itself online. So we grew up in Canada with a commercial, and it was called Freedom 55. And when I was a kid, these commercials on the radio, it was like Freedom 55. It was this insurance company that said, you retire at 55, Freedom 55. And it always kind of bugged me. It's like, wow, that sounds so old when you're 10 or 12. And I'm 55 now. And I'm thinking, I got at least 30 years left of very competent, hopefully intellectual thinking. So I think what we have to be as a tribe of Rubies is to be loud and proud. And we can not forgive ourselves if we pretend that we're not a certain age. Like we just like once more of us start being loud and proud about your age, what that number is, and what you've done with that career that you have, that then lends itself to point number 3, which is your transferable skills. I think what we have to get out of, and again, I say we, I say us, the Rubies, we have to get out of the, well, I've been an engineer for 40 years. I got nothing left in the tank. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've been a marketing agency rep for 35 years. I got whacked. I'm 62. I have no idea what I'm going to do next. The fact of the matter is that you have an incredible mezzanine of experiences that are transferable. Now, you may not be an engineer or a marketer going forward, but we have to be open to the possibility that we can do other things, because I assure you, John, and you know this, you can do other things because of that gained wisdom and crystallized intelligence and the tacit knowledge of how things actually work in life and work can be transferred to another organization or role. And I think that we have to disassociate our, well, I was VP of this or director of that, and start thinking about, well, what's your skills map, and start identifying with all the good things that you can do and how you might transfer that into either another full-time role, maybe it's a part-time role, maybe you are what I call the Trivial Pursuit pie graph and the pie piece, and you have 6 things that you do, and each of those are all part of your skills map. It's your transferability pie piece, and you can do these little pie pieces, over the course of whatever you call your career next. So those are 3 things I think we got to be thinking about.
Fantastic advice. And in fact, I've just kicked off a series of episodes that are upcoming, which address really that, which is literally every week, once or twice, there will be an episode that talks about opportunities, different opportunities. I think there are up to 20 episodes coming that literally will give an idea every week on what is a possibility that you could re-employ your knowledge and your wisdom. And I really love your loud and proud. If you look at the logo of the Ageism Survival Guide, it's kind of an upraised fist with a microphone. And then the music that I've chosen is a bit of a protest song style of kind of heavy rock. So I'm not going quietly. And thank you for the loud and proud.
Excellent. Well, we are going to be friends for life then, for the rest of our Ruby lives.
Perfect. I want to thank you, Dan, for joining today and for sharing what you've learned, looking across the whole globe, not just in the US or Canada, about the impact of ageism and demographics and where this is going, and for being a person who is ringing that siren, ringing the bell for companies and for individuals to watch out. It was really a pleasure to talk about that today.
The honor was mine, John. Again, thank you for the opportunity. You're not just well prepared; you're in the thick of what we ought to be doing to be loud and proud, and to push sort of a new way of thinking, a new chapter, a new livery in our airplane metaphor here, so we can fly to the next destination.
Absolutely. I'm fully on board with you there, and I did mean that pun. So I think with that, let's wrap up this episode. Fantastic discussion. I'm going to make sure that the links for not just the one book that you name dropped, but all of them are going to be in the show notes, so that the listeners or viewers of the episode this week will have the chance to check those out and hopefully consider to order one or more of your books.
Very kind of you. I wish everyone that may have stuck around this long wellness in your age path. And thank you again, John.
You're welcome. You're welcome. As we always say here on the Ageism Survival Guide, youth runs fast, but age knows the terrain. Until next time.